got on the other side of it, Peter Fabricius from the Institute for Security Studies, who's joining me via Skype now. I must say to you, I mean, when we're looking at the legacy of Robert Mugabe, as we've heard from our previous guest, saying that maybe he was actually fallen prey to the system that uses African leaders as pawns, and oftentimes that system always manages to win against the very same leaders. What are your views on that one there, Peter?
Yeah, I would have to say that I rather fundamentally disagree with that. I mean, I think that would be a sort of Mugabe-esque view of his own history as leader. And it's very exculpatory, shall we say, a huge excuse for really leading his country into disaster. I mean, ultimately, when you assess Mugabe, you have to assess him on the state of Zimbabwe. And I mean, who would look at Zimbabwe today and say that is a successful country? That's a great legacy, Robert Mugabe. You did a great job. Now, obviously, you can look around for scapegoats all over the world. The IMF, you know, Tony Blair, the West, whatever. But ultimately, I think, you know, unless the word leadership doesn't mean what the dictionary says it means, we have to hold leaders accountable for what they actually do. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about the mixed legacy. And, of course, he was a very divisive figure. He was very divisive in life, and he's been very divisive in death. You just have to look at the reactions, you know, the comments, the statements that have been made across the board in Africa and elsewhere, and on Twitter and so on, and you'll see how sharply divided opinion is. Some people see him as the great hero, as you say, the great liberation fighter who then carried on even after liberation to fight the so-called, you know, neo-colonialism and neo-imperialism of British and other Western interests, and then others to see him as somebody who destroyed his economy. I actually think that the latter is correct. I mean, I think one should give him credit for fighting for the liberation of Zimbabwe, so up to 1980, and then for some years after that. But he should have, like even ZANU-PF, you were quoting earlier, was saying he overstayed his welcome. Not by as much as others would say, because I think, you know, there's a good reason why there's 10-year term limits for presidents across most of the continent, because after that they tend to entrench themselves in power and you know, and abuse it, which is exactly what he did.
So the entrenching of power and as on one side, as you're saying, that it's almost a very divisive legacy that he leaves behind, Peter. But on the other side of it, are we actually paying attention? I'm just going back to also what Charles Sinkala was saying, that are we not also just marring the complete legacy with the negativity and not necessarily even putting some light to some of those policies that were put into place, which were for the betterment of Zimbabwe, which were for the betterment of the development of Zimbabwe, whether those happened within the 1980s in itself, where it was really the peak in terms of good leadership and good governance is concerned. But have we just managed to completely put a blur on that and focus on only the negativity that arose, especially from 2008 onwards?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we do have to give him his due for what happened, as I said, before 1980 and for some years after. But, you know, if you're going to look at a leader who's just died, and even if you assess the legacy of Mugabe 2 years ago when he was ousted, you have to look at what he leaves behind, you know. So you have to take what he did that was positive in the 80s, and then you have to take what he did that was highly negative. And it's not just a question of weighing them up, you know, on each hand and seeing which is the heavier, because he stayed in power and he then systematically unraveled all the good that he had done. And so he brought the economy to the knees. When the government of national unity was introduced in are you still there? Yeah. When the government of national unity was still was introduced in 2009 after those disastrous elections in 2008, which he, by the way, lost. You know, as we all know, inflation had run into ridiculous figures that just became meaningless, trillions of percent, and the depreciation of the Zimbabwe dollar was something like 80 trillion to the US dollar. It was just he turned the economy into a joke, and that's the legacy, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, when they actually even say, even in the media, unfortunately, people remember the bad news, and one would wonder exactly how is Robert Mugabe remembered, especially amongst his people. Never mind us as the media who continue to speak and speculate, but really when it comes to people, how do people remember him as the leader? And of course, those tributes will continue to pour in as we really reflect on the legacy of former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe.